Stories are second chances. My name is Osadumebi, and every week I usually tell you a short story written by a Nigerian writer or author. But this is Series Week, where I tell you a story over the course of 2 to 7 consecutive days. Basically, however long it takes to complete the story. Series Week will occur once a quarter, and the stories featured will still be written by Nigerian writers and authors, and will either consist of a sequence of related episodes from one story, or a set of stories linked by a common theme. That's the long and short of it. So without much ado, today's story is by Kesiena Olunwa, and it is the fifth and final part of the story titled The Good Neighbor. Catch up on earlier episodes for parts 1 to 4. The usher headed towards me again, but the pastor waved him off. Looking straight at Bayo and the pastor, I stood up straight and squared my shoulder before stating boldly, "Pastor, to prove that Bayo is Derek and Derek is Bayo, please take him to the men's room and check. He has 3 very distinct marks on his body. 2 are birthmarks, and 1 is from an injury that he obtained from his NYSC days where we met." I had only just finished describing the first birthmark when Bayo's wife-to-be walked up to him and gave him a resounding slap before storming off, closely followed by her maid of honor. A chorus of gasps, followed by a cacophony of voices, filled the auditorium. As I descended the pulpit, the congregation began to cheer. Never would they have imagined that church today would have been this entertaining. I knew my face was plastered over countless pictures and videos, but I had nothing to lose. For once, being an orphan had its perks. And if there was blowback from my office, the dust will eventually settle and I'll find another job. All that mattered to me was that Bayo was finally exposed. As I walked towards Alex, who was still carrying a gloomy-looking Elora, he nodded at me and made a beeline for the exit. I picked up Jessica and followed quickly. As we made our way to the car park, cameras were still recording. People were pointing and whispering. I was not bothered about myself, but the girls. People had no sense of protecting minors, but I was not about to say anything and cause another scene. We finally got to the car, and we hurriedly settled the girls in. I wanted to get out of sight as quickly as possible. As I moved to get into the front passenger seat, I was accosted by 4 men who introduced themselves as Bayo's relatives. I would place 2 of them somewhere in their 50s, and the other 2 about a decade younger. They began apologizing, stating this was not how Bayo had been raised, how this was not who they were as a family, claiming they had no prior knowledge of me or my daughter. I was amused. Bayo had always claimed to be an orphan like me, and for all the while I had been married to him, I had never seen any of these so-called relatives. I was not interested in anything they had to say, so I politely declined when they asked for my contact details to keep in touch. With unfolding events, I didn't want anything to do with anyone claiming to be linked to Bayo. They were not to be trusted. Anyone not already in the car I was about to get into was not to be trusted. I excused myself and got into the car. Alex took a slightly different route and stopped by a mall which had a food hall with some of the girls' favorite eating spots. Lunch was somewhat subdued as we silently devoured the food we were served. It felt like the morning's event had made all of us extra hungry. By the time we'd strolled to the ice cream store, we had perked up a fair bit. Alex indulged the girls with extra scoops and toppings. I went along with it. I had been on autopilot since we left church. I was present only in body, my mind in places and spaces I could not fathom. Not long after we got home, both girls headed for their room and fell asleep. I suspected Alex had hoped for this outcome when he agreed to their lunch and dessert excesses. I knew the questions would eventually come, but I was grateful for the extra time. As I sat, lost in thought, Alex joined me on the sofa with a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses. He poured me a glass, which I downed in one, and he poured me another. "How are you?" he asked. I could see concern etched on his face. This was going to be the first proper conversation we were having since I got evicted, and I was grateful that he'd given me the space to figure out what I was feeling and thinking. I knew my emotions were still raw, and I wasn't sure what was going to come out of my mouth. But I figured talking might help. Even before I said a word, tears began trickling down my face, and I let them. Once I started talking, I could not stop. But Alex just listened without interrupting. I was all over the place, but he seemed to be keeping track. I talked about meeting Bayo and our life together. I talked about my parents, their death, and the orphanage. I talked about my anger towards God. I talked about becoming a mom. I just talked. And as I talked, I sat on the couch. I paced around the living room. I sat on the floor, and then I paced around some more. And all the while, Alex just listened, topping up my drink whenever I emptied it, and ensuring I had a steady supply of tissues. Goodness knows how long I talked for, but I was drained when I finally stopped. And I just sat on the couch crying. Alex scooched over to where I was sitting. And for the first time since I started squatting at his place, he pulled me in for a hug, unleashing a fresh wave of tears as his arms enveloped me. In a season where I was sure to have cancelled men completely, this one man had proved there was a remnant who were a cut above. We were startled by a sudden banging on the door. Alex pulled back from me, a puzzled look on his face. The banging became persistent and he dashed to the door. He looked through the peephole and cursed. I thought I heard him say, "Brace yourself," as he opened the door, and Bayo barged in, fuming. I got up from my seat and backed away towards the bedrooms. Thankfully, Alex got around Bayo and obstructed his path. He stood as a barricade, making sure Bayo didn't get any further into the apartment. Bayo seethed. "I see you have moved in with your lover, and you are still following me around, trying to mess with my life." I stood transfixed, too drained to say anything. "Do you think that your little show today will stop me from getting married to Isabel? Think again. This is evidence that we are officially done," he said, waving an envelope in his hand. He threw it in my direction, but it flopped to the floor behind Alex. "As for you," he turned on Alex, "ride her all you want. We both know that that is all you are here for, and it is not even as if she's good at it. And with her ambition, she might yet trap you with marriage and lump you with that bastard child she tried to saddle me with. You are crazier than I gave you credit for. I will not grace your baseless accusations with a response, but I will say this," Alex continued as he dragged Bayo by the belt towards the door. "It will be my utmost pleasure if she traps me into marriage, and an absolute honor to Father Elora." And with those words, he shoved Bayo out of the apartment and slammed the door. After a few months of patient persuasion, I finally agreed to trap Alex in marriage. And believe me when I say it took some persuading. But Alex was very convincing, both in his words and through his actions. He reluctantly agreed to me moving out in the first instance, and he helped me find a place close by. He knew I needed to work through some stuff alone and to heal. He gave me space, but not too much. According to him, he said he was not going to risk me shutting down and shutting him out. There was no chance of that ever happening though, as I had his number one fan to contend with, Elora. I could not bring myself to keep her away from Jessica. She was at her happiest when they were together. And when we were alone, Elora constantly peppered me with questions about moving back in with Alex and Jessica. The more I looked for reasons against, the more I found reasons in favor of. And yes, as petty as it may be, one of those reasons was to spite Bayo. But more importantly, there was no denying the attraction between Alex and I. And amidst the muddle of emotions, there was also no denying the feelings I had for him. He had made his intentions clear from the day he threw Bayo out, and ever so often thereafter. We both acknowledged the mess that we would have to sort through, but given how we had navigated what felt like the eye of the storm, we were confident we would be able to navigate whatever else might arise. Elora and I eventually got to meet the rest of Alex's family, and they were nothing but welcoming and supportive. They immediately took us in, and very quickly became the extended family we never had. Surrounded by so much love and care, it was clear to see why Alex and Jessica were so grounded. After we got married, Alex legally adopted Elora. She was beside herself when the paperwork came through, and she could officially have the same last name as Jessica, Omoye. For weeks on end, she would randomly call Alex Dad, whether she had anything to say to him or not. And he would respond with different terms of endearment, and she would just break out in a smile. It became their thing, randomly calling and responding to each other. I got a little bit jealous from time to time, but Elora deserved all the loving she got from Alex. Interestingly, she never mentioned Bayo again after the church incident. Speaking of Bayo, karma did its thing after our little church drama got us Insta famous, as our story trended on social media for months. He got arrested and was charged with multiple counts of marriage scam after several women emerged claiming he had been or was still married to them. Some claimed that he had married them for their money and had been siphoning their funds. It turns out I was one of the few whose life wasn't in absolute shambles as a result of his diabolical schemes. It has now been 5 years since Alex and I said I do, and I have not for once regretted the leap of faith I took in trusting again. I dare say he hasn't regretted his decision either. We've had a few challenges along the way, yes, but Alex has made loving feel easy. For both of us, our second attempt with love has been a testament of God's goodness and grace. God, I had to surrender. If for nothing else, it was in his house I got to expose Bayo. But way beyond that, I've come to see his ever-present love and care for me despite my challenging beginning. And getting to know more of Alex's story and him sharing his faith with me has been invaluable. There is still a lot I don't understand. a lot I still have to learn about God, His ways and His plans for me. But I realize that He is relational and eager to connect. And all I ever have to do is lean in and talk to Him. Thankfully, we now get to walk with God together as a family. One last thing. We now have a little Alex, much to the delight of his doting big sisters. Kesiena Olunwa is a writer who resides in Lagos, Nigeria. She is an entrepreneur and loves networking. To connect and read more of her work, visit her Instagram page at fictiononlyng. Details and links will be in the episode description. If you've got a story you would like to be featured on this podcast, or a published book you want to make into an audiobook, send an email to info@osadumebi.com or send me a message at osadumebi on either Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or X. I look forward to collaborating with you. And if you've enjoyed this week's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and tell someone, everyone, that stories are a good escape for a few minutes each week.